Relationships are sacred threads in the tapestry of human experience. When torn, they many carry quiet grief from damaged connections, unspoken pain that prayer alone can begin to touch and heal. Healing is not magic, it is the honest, trembling desire to make things right, even when the cost is humility. Real prayer doesn't just change the other, it changes you. It reshapes your heart to walk across the distance with grace. To forgive is to speak in the dialect of eternity. It breaks the curse of pride and invites divine intervention. When human effort falters, divine hands are still at work, stitching together what we cannot mend ourselves. There is a peculiar kind of loneliness, worse than solitude. It is the loneliness that comes not from being alone, but from being separated, by silence, by betrayal, by pride, from someone once dear. And here lies the great tragedy. We are not only born for connection, but we are wounded most deeply by its absence. This is not a speech about religion for the devout or doctrine for the theologian. No, this is a cry from the valley, the place where friends no longer speak, where marriages grow cold, where siblings become strangers. And it is here, in this hidden ache, that the need for prayer becomes unmistakable. Why listen on? Because if you have ever loved and lost, not to death, but to bitterness, then this may be the door to peace you've been hoping would open. Stay with me, not for words, but for the hope they might carry. Relationships decay not by great cataclysms, but by the slow drip of neglect, the rust of resentment, the splinters of misunderstanding, a harsh word, a forgotten promise, a failure to say I was wrong. These are the seeds of division. And yet, somehow, we are always surprised when love grows cold. When Adam first hid in the garden, it was not the thorns on the ground that signaled the fall. It was the distance from God, distance from the woman. And we, their children, still hide behind leaves of pride. But prayer, true prayer, is not simply a request for repair. It is an act of reorientation. It says, I cannot fix this alone. I cannot trust my emotions to be the final judge. I cannot even be sure I am right. And in that confession, healing begins. To pray for someone who has hurt you is to untie the knot in your soul. It is to place the burden not into their hands or even yours, but into the hands that once bore nails for reconciliation. Healing doesn't always come with a sweeping reconciliation scene. Sometimes it comes quietly, a softening of heart, a memory without bitterness, a courage to reach out again. Prayer does not erase the past. It redeems it. It does not guarantee the return of a lost friend. It guarantees that you will no longer be lost to yourself. What is restored in love is often stronger than what was never broken. Wounds healed well become stories that heal others. A marriage that survives betrayal becomes a fortress. A friendship recovered becomes a testimony. Do not fear the risk of restoration. Fear the numbness of a heart unwilling to try. There is one who specializes in restoration. He spoke peace to storms and life to tombs. He still speaks to hearts divided. When we pray, we do not twist the arm of heaven. We align our will with its mercy. To those longing for healing, begin with prayer. Not once, not perfectly, but honestly. And to those who feel restoration is impossible, remember, resurrection always begins in a grave. You were made for communion, not only with God, but with one another. The ache you feel is not weakness. It is the echo of Eden. Do not silence it. Do not drown it. Pray it. And believe that the same voice that called Lazarus from the tomb can call love back to life. There are many wounds a man may suffer, but few ache so quietly, yet so persistently, as the wound of a broken relationship. The pain of physical injury demands attention. It screams, it bleeds, it bruises the surface. But the pain of separation between souls, of friendship turned distant, of family ties severed, of love soured into silence, this pain hides itself in the crevices of the heart and lingers there like a ghost that refuses to be banished. And strangely, we live as if such breaks in fellowship are to be expected, as if they are normal and therefore unworthy of grief. We excuse them, minimize them, or justify them, when in truth they are evidence of something terribly unnatural, something contrary to what we were made for. For man is a relational creature, not by social instinct alone, nor by evolutionary chance, but by divine design. The heart was not crafted to stand alone. It was shaped to connect, to commune, to know and be known. From the beginning, even in paradise, it was declared not good for man to be alone, not simply because he needed help with the garden, but because something was lacking in isolation. That statement, not good, was the first such verdict in a world otherwise declared very good. It is no small thing. Loneliness, therefore, is not a flaw of temperament, but a signal of incompleteness. And when those connections which should bring joy are fractured, something in us mourns, even if we do not allow ourselves to name the grief. The rupture of relationship is not merely an unfortunate incident. It is a spiritual event. It echoes the first great divide, when humanity turned from its Maker and found the gates of Eden closed behind it. That breach introduced fear, blame, and shame into the human vocabulary, and it has done so ever since in every conflict, every estrangement, every goodbye said in anger, or never said at all. Our broken relationships are not isolated tragedies. They are symptoms of the larger human condition. To feel the ache of such a break is not weakness. It is clarity. The pain is proof that something sacred has been torn. Like a temple veil ripped from top to bottom, or a song interrupted mid-verse, the interruption of fellowship leaves an echo behind, a sense that something meant to be whole has been shattered. And often, tragically, it is in our closest relationships that this pain strikes the deepest. A stranger may insult you and you forget it by morning, but the coldness in a parent's voice or the silence of a former friend can echo through years. The temptation, of course, is to harden ourselves. To say, well, it's better this way, or people change, or that chapter is closed. And perhaps there is some wisdom in that, for not all wounds heal through contact. But be careful that what you call closure is not simply surrender. Be wary of building walls that were only meant to be fences. The soul cannot thrive in isolation, no matter how well furnished the fortress. When fellowship is fractured, the path to restoration is not paved with pride. It begins in humility, and that is where prayer enters, not as a pious routine, but as a desperate act of honesty. Prayer for healing in a relationship is not a demand that God fix the other person. It is an invitation for him to search you, to reveal your own failings, to grant you courage to take the first step, even if that step is simply releasing resentment in the quiet of your heart. The fracture of fellowship hurts most because it touches the very thing we were created for, communion. And that is why prayer is so vital. It returns us to the one who never breaks fellowship, even when we are the ones who flee. It reminds us that there is always hope, not necessarily for everything to return exactly as it was, but for something better to be born from the ashes. Redemption is never about the restoration of the old. It is about the creation of something new, something deeper, something forged in fire and sanctified by grace. So when you feel that ache, that pang of separation that strikes without warning, do not dismiss it. Do not smother it beneath busyness or drown it in distraction. Let it drive you to your knees, for in the fracture of fellowship lies the invitation to seek the one who mends all things, and through him to reach again across the chasm, however impossible it may seem. This is not weakness. It is the most human thing you can do. There is a peculiar kind of pain that few talk about, yet many carry. It doesn't announce itself loudly, doesn't demand crutches or surgery. It does not leave visible scars or solicit sympathy from the crowd, but it lives beneath the surface, humming like a sorrowful melody in the quiet hours of the night. This pain is the silent wound left by broken relationships, the kind of wound that does not shout but whispers. And like all things that whisper, it is easier to ignore until it has grown into something that begins to shape your life. The difficulty of this wound is that it rarely finds language. How do you explain to someone that your heart aches not from a single moment of betrayal, but from a slow drifting, from distance that was never fully named? How do you speak of pain when the person who caused it no longer speaks to you, or perhaps is no longer alive? What do you do with the conversations you still rehearse in your mind but never say aloud? These are not dramatic stories told in memoirs or shouted across courtrooms. These are the quiet losses, the kind we are taught to move on from, the kind we are told to get over, and yet they linger, because deep down we know that something sacred has gone missing. There are those who carry wounds from words never apologized for, embraces never offered again, phone calls that stopped without explanation. Sometimes the most painful part is not what was done, but what was left undone, the birthday not remembered, the silence after the argument, the absence that becomes permanent before you even had a chance to say, "Wait, don't go." And yet in this silence there is a strange dignity we attempt to maintain. We grow accustomed to carrying the pain alone. We bury it beneath daily obligations. We armor ourselves in productivity, distractions, and busyness. But the wound does not disappear. It becomes quieter, yes, but deeper, and often we fear that if we truly face it, if we name the pain and admit the hurt, it might undo us. So we protect ourselves with indifference. We say things like, "It doesn't matter anymore," or "I'm fine," when what we mean is, "I've given up hoping it will be different." But the truth is, unspoken pain is not healed pain. It merely disguises itself, and like a splinter beneath the skin, it will fester until brought into the light. This is why prayer is not only a spiritual act, it is a profoundly human one. It is, perhaps, the most honest thing we can do with this kind of wound. Because in prayer we finally give voice to what we have been too afraid or too proud to say. Prayer for the restoration of relationships is not merely asking for the past to return. It is asking for courage to face what broke, for grace to forgive what cannot be undone, and for strength to hope again where hope has long felt dangerous. It is the offering of a heart that says, "I am tired of pretending I do not feel this," and in that moment something shifts. The silence begins to break, not always outwardly. The other person may never return. The apology may never come. But in prayer, the burden of carrying it alone is lifted. In prayer, your soul finds a listener who does not dismiss your ache, who never says it's not a big deal, or you're being too sensitive. In prayer, there is someone who sees the invisible weight and calls it by name. And perhaps more powerfully, prayer prepares your heart to reach out. It doesn't always command reconciliation, but it plants the possibility. A softened tone, a letter written but not yet sent, a memory no longer laced with bitterness, these are small miracles, and they often begin in prayer, because ultimately silence must be answered, not necessarily with noise, but with truth. The silent wound heals not through forgetting, but through honest reckoning, and prayer is where that reckoning begins. It is the place where we remember that our pain is not too small for the divine, that our aching silence is heard in heaven even when it is ignored on earth. So if you carry that wound, the one you've hidden, the one you've minimized, do not dismiss it any longer. Bring it into the light, not with loud cries, but with quiet honesty. Prayer does not demand perfection. It only asks for presence, and in that offering healing begins. The wound may be silent, but heaven is not. There is a common assumption that healing in relationships is a matter of time, that if we wait long enough, if we simply move forward, if we distract ourselves sufficiently, the pain will fade and things will settle on their own. But time, though it teaches, does not heal what the will refuses to touch. The restoration of a broken relationship does not begin with time. It begins with a decision, a quiet, trembling decision, often born in solitude and humility, the decision that something matters enough to try again. The world offers many alternatives to restoration: avoidance, indifference, blame, vengeance. These come easier, almost naturally. To close off a heart is far simpler than to open it again after it has been wounded. There is a peculiar comfort in bitterness. It justifies us, protects us, hardens us. It tells us that we are safe so long as we do not care, but that comfort is cold, and over time it leaves the soul stiff and unresponsive to love. True restoration begins, not with grand gestures or eloquent apologies, but with an interior shift. It starts when a man or woman says to themselves, "I no longer want this distance. Even if I was right, even if I was wronged, I do not want this silence to win." That moment, though invisible to others, is sacred. It is the seed from which healing may grow. Without it, no effort will last. With it, even the smallest step can be transformative. This desire to restore is not weakness. It is not capitulation. It is the rare courage to love again in a world that teaches us to protect ourselves at all costs. It is the humility to recognize that being at peace is more important than being proven right. And it is the wisdom to know that relationships are not sustained by victory, but by mercy. But the will to restore must also reckon with reality. Restoration is not always welcomed. You may extend a hand and find it left hanging. You may send a message and hear only silence. You may even ask for forgiveness and receive no reply. But still, the act of reaching out is not wasted. For even when the outward result is not what we hoped, something within us changes. The weight of resentment begins to loosen. The sharp edge of pride is dulled. And in that surrender, peace begins to take root. Prayer plays a vital role here. Because the desire to restore is often accompanied by fear. Fear of rejection, fear of being misunderstood again, fear of being hurt a second time. Prayer is where that fear is brought into the light. Prayer steadies the will. It reminds us that we do not step toward reconciliation alone. We are accompanied by one who restores all things, one who forgave his betrayers, one who bore wounds and still chose to love. To pray for restoration is not to manipulate an outcome. It is to align your heart with love, even when love is not returned. It is to say, "I am willing to be healed, even if the other person is not." That willingness, that open-handed posture, changes you. And in many cases, it becomes the very thing that opens the door for the other to walk through, not always, but often enough to be worth the risk. We must be honest. Some relationships will never be what they were. Some will not be restored in this life, but the will to restore is never wasted because it shapes the kind of person you are becoming. Each time you choose humility over hardness, hope over cynicism, love over pride, you participate in something eternal. You declare, not just with words, but with your heart, that reconciliation is possible, that grace is stronger than the fracture, that the story does not have to end in silence, and sometimes that choice to begin again, hesitant, trembling, unsure, is all that is needed. One message, one apology, one sincere word, these are the seeds of healing. The mighty rivers of reconciliation often begin with a single drop of courage. So do not wait for the perfect moment. Do not wait for them to move first. Do not wait until you are sure it will be welcomed. Restoration begins when one person dares to say, "This matters enough to try." That is how love lives again. That is how peace takes root. That is how heaven touches earth. one act of willing restoration at a time. There are two great illusions that often hinder the healing of broken relationships. The first is the belief that the other person must change before peace can be restored. The second is the belief that prayer is a kind of divine lever, a way of moving heaven to fix someone else. But true prayer does not function like a tool we use to reshape others. Rather, it functions first as a mirror, revealing ourselves, and then as a bridge, leading us toward reconciliation with humility. When one prays for a broken relationship, the initial impulse is usually focused outward. Change them, correct them, open their eyes, soften their heart. These are natural petitions, often born of real hurt. But the mystery of prayer is that before it ever touches another heart, it begins its deep work in the one who prays. The act of entering into prayer pulls us from the realm of accusation into the realm of self-examination. It is in prayer that we begin to see our own pride, our own assumptions, our own bitterness, not as justified weapons, but as barriers to healing. What begins as a plea for change in another becomes a quiet plea for grace in ourselves. Prayer is not a tool to manipulate outcomes. It is a transformative space, a kind of sacred chamber where we come face to face with our own condition. If you have ever dared to pray sincerely for someone who has hurt you, then you know how confronting it can be. You begin to see their humanity, perhaps even their brokenness, and something within you softens. Not because they are excused, but because you begin to realize how tightly your pain has gripped you, how much energy you have spent rehearsing arguments, winning imaginary confrontations, proving your point in solitude. Prayer exposes the soul's attachment to control, and once that mirror has done its work, prayer begins to act as a bridge, not always in the physical sense. Not every prayer leads to a phone call, not every prayer ends in a hug, but it builds a bridge in the heart. It creates a way across the chasm of pain, pride, or distance. This internal bridge is often the first step toward external restoration. Long before words are exchanged, something within shifts. The posture of the soul turns from defense to openness. There is a strange paradox here. We tend to think that reconciliation is the result of clarity, logic, or the right sequence of events. But often it is the result of softened hearts, and softened hearts are not formed through arguments. They are formed in the quiet place of prayer, where we surrender not only our wounds, but our need to be vindicated. This is not to say that prayer is passive, far from it. It is one of the most courageous things a person can do. To enter into prayer for someone you are estranged from is to go to war, not against them, but against your own bitterness, against the darkness that has settled in your heart. It takes more strength to pray sincerely for someone who hurt you than it does to shut the door forever. Prayer requires humility. It requires a willingness to be wrong. It requires the courage to bless when cursing would be easier. And yet, this is where healing begins. Not in the moment of apology, not in the dramatic reunion, but in the quiet resolve of the soul that says, I want to see this rightly. I want to be free from this weight. I am willing, if only inwardly at first, to take one step toward peace. It must be said that prayer does not always change the other person. They may never respond. They may not even be aware of your prayer, but it changes you. It makes you more merciful, more whole, more capable of loving without needing control. That change in itself is a kind of restoration. Even if the relationship does not return to what it once was, you become someone more able to walk in grace, in freedom, in peace. In this way, prayer is both personal and relational. It reorders the heart, it clears the vision, it makes space for something better to grow. Not always what was, but something new, a different kind of connection, a more honest kind of love. Prayer will not always remove the pain, but it will make you strong enough to carry it with compassion rather than contempt. So pray, not just to fix what is broken, but to become someone capable of healing. Let the mirror do its work, then walk, however slowly, across the bridge it reveals. To love at all is to risk. That is the cruel and beautiful truth at the heart of every meaningful relationship. Where there is love, there is the potential for joy so deep it brings tears, and sorrow so sharp it leaves scars. No love is immune to the danger of disappointment. And when love is wounded, when relationships fracture, one of the greatest challenges to restoration is the terrifying requirement of vulnerability. Vulnerability is not a soft word, it is a dangerous one. It implies exposure, openness, a laying bare of the heart. It means we must lower the walls we've built around ourselves for protection. And the longer we have lived behind those walls, the harder it is to come out from them. We become comfortable in our emotional armor. We convince ourselves that distance is wisdom, that numbness is peace. But beneath it all lies a longing, a yearning to be known again, to be understood, to be embraced not as we appear, but as we truly are. The problem is that to make that journey toward restoration, we must once again offer something of ourselves. We must speak a word that may not be received. We must admit hurt or fault or longing, and there is no guarantee that the other person will respond in kind. They may reject us, they may ignore us, they may wound us again, but if we are to pursue healing, we must take that chance. This is where many falter, not because they don't care about the relationship, but because the pain of the previous wound has taught them to fear further injury. They reason it is better to stay silent than to risk more heartbreak. And in a way that makes sense, vulnerability offers no insurance policy. You can be misunderstood, even mocked for reaching out. But what is the alternative? A life of guardedness, a heart locked behind high walls. That, too, is a kind of suffering. Quieter, perhaps, but just as corrosive. There is immense courage in saying, "I miss you," or "I was wrong," or "I wish things were different." These are not weak words. They are words forged in the fire of humility. They are heavy because they carry the weight of risk. But without them, no bridge can be built, no rift closed, no wound healed. Vulnerability is the path, not the obstacle, to restoration. Prayer plays a profound role here. In prayer, we practice vulnerability before the one who cannot reject us. We lay down our pride and speak the truth about our fear, our sadness, our longing to make things right. And as we do, we find the strength to risk vulnerability with others. Prayer becomes a rehearsal for honesty. In that quiet communion, we are reminded that we are not alone, not foolish for wanting reconciliation, not weak for feeling hurt. In fact, we are most human in those very desires. To open one's heart again, especially after betrayal or distance, is to step onto holy ground, because in that moment we imitate the divine. We mirror the one who, knowing he would be rejected, still came close, still reached out, still offered himself. Vulnerability is not simply human, it is sacred. It is the posture of the cross, arms open wide, heart exposed, love offered without condition. Of course, vulnerability does not mean naivety. It does not demand that we trust recklessly or forget wisdom. But it does mean we lead with grace, that we risk, not because we are sure of the outcome, but because we believe that love is worth the cost. Because we know that the alternative, a life cut off from others, is a slow, silent death. There are no guarantees in relationships. No prayer, however sincere, can force another to open their heart, but vulnerability gives them the opportunity. It says there is still a way back if you are willing. And even if they do not take it, you will have walked in integrity. You will have done what love requires. You will have opened the door. The reward of vulnerability is not only reconciliation. though that is a gift beyond measure. The reward is also freedom, the knowledge that you did not let fear rule you, that you chose openness over bitterness, that you remained human in a world that tempts us to become stone. So take the risk. Say the hard thing, offer the hand even if it trembles. Vulnerability may wound you, but it is also the only path to the kind of love that heals. Expectations, if they haven't apologized by now, they never will. Or we imagine ideal moments, at the holiday, at the reunion, on my birthday. Surely then we'll reconcile. But time, as we experience it, does not always move in harmony with the movements of grace. There is a mystery at the heart of all true restoration. It rarely happens according to our clock. Divine timing is not about delay for the sake of frustration, but about preparation. The soul, like the soil, must be tilled before it can receive seed, and often both hearts in a broken relationship are not ready at the same time. One may be softening while the other is still stiff with pride. One may be healing while the other is unaware there is even a wound. God, in his infinite patience, allows space for hearts to ripen, not to punish us with waiting, but to protect the integrity of what is being restored. We misunderstand time because we imagine it as linear progress. We think in deadlines, milestones, ultimatums. But the work of healing in the human heart is more like the tide. It comes and goes, it advances and retreats, often without warning. And yet it moves with purpose. It may seem to stall, but beneath the surface a deep shift is occurring. God does not waste time. What feels like delay may actually be mercy, the time we need to learn, to surrender, to be emptied of our bitterness so that love can find a home again. There are moments in life when we long to restore a relationship more than anything else, but the doors remain shut, the phone stays silent, the apology never comes. In those moments, we are tempted to despair, to believe the silence is final. But restoration is not ours to manufacture. We may sow the seed, but we do not control the rain. We may offer forgiveness, but we cannot force the return. This is where trust is most tested, not in whether we believe restoration is good, but whether we believe it will come in its proper time, even if that time is not ours. The mystery of divine timing is that it often looks, for long stretches, like nothing is happening. We pray and see no movement. We reach out and hear no reply. And yet, in that very space of waiting, something holy is unfolding. The waiting is not passive. It is active with purpose. It is a season of becoming. Perhaps we are being changed so that, when the moment of restoration finally comes, we will be the kind of people who can sustain it. Perhaps they are being changed too, or perhaps both. And sometimes, in God's deep mercy, he answers a prayer for restoration not by reviving the past, but by creating something altogether new. The relationship may not return in the form we once knew it, but something redemptive may rise in its place, something more honest, more rooted, more free. This is part of the mystery. Restoration does not always mean reversal. It means redemption. What was broken is not simply glued back together, it is made new. This kind of trust does not come easily. It requires the surrender of our timetable, our vision, our need to see immediate results. It means we must hold both hope and patience in the same hand, and this is perhaps why prayer is so necessary. Not because prayer speeds up the clock, but because it strengthens the soul to endure the waiting. Prayer draws our eyes up from the calendar and into the heart of God, where time is not a pressure but a promise. So if you are waiting for restoration, if the relationship still feels distant, if the silence still aches, do not assume the story is over. The author is still writing. What seems like an ending may only be a pause. And what feels like too long may be, in the wisdom of heaven, just long enough. Trust this, when restoration comes, it will be at the right time, not merely for convenience, but for the fullness of joy. And in that moment you will see that what God was doing in the delay was not denial, but preparation. He was shaping the heart, aligning the paths, softening the soil. Restoration is coming, and it will be worth the wait. Forgiveness is a word that is often misunderstood, softened by sentiment or hardened by obligation. We think of it as a grand gesture, a climactic moment at the end of a long and painful journey, a finish line we cross after we've endured enough. But true forgiveness, especially in the realm of relationships, is not the conclusion of restoration. It is the beginning. It is the gate through which all healing must pass, and that, perhaps, is why it is so difficult. When a relationship is wounded by betrayal, neglect, or misunderstanding, the instinct is to protect. We build walls not only to keep others out, but to contain the ache within us. We might say we've forgiven, but if we are honest, we often mean, I've chosen to stop talking about it. Or I've moved on because I'm tired of hurting. But this kind of forgiveness is thin. It may provide the illusion of peace, but not the substance. True forgiveness is not forgetting, and it is not pretending. It is the costly act of choosing to release someone from the debt they owe us, even when every fiber of our being still feels the weight of that debt. This is why forgiveness must come first in any journey of restoration, because without it, everything we try to rebuild is poisoned by the past. We may speak kind words, send thoughtful messages, even attempt reconciliation, but if we are still holding tightly to our resentment, if we have not yet unclenched our fists, the relationship will never be truly healed. Forgiveness clears the ground, it removes the debris, it says, I am no longer going to hold this over you, I am opening a path, even if you choose not to walk it. Forgiveness is not a feeling, it is not a sudden burst of compassion that overtakes us. More often than not, it is an act of will. A trembling, reluctant, fiercely deliberate act that we choose to repeat, sometimes daily, because the pain does not vanish all at once. The memory returns, the hurt resurfaces. And each time it does, forgiveness must rise again, not as denial but as defiance, a refusal to let the wound define us, a decision to be free even if the other person remains unchanged. There is a strange liberation in this kind of forgiveness. We begin it thinking we are offering mercy to another, but we discover that we are being freed ourselves. As long as we carry bitterness, we are chained to the very thing we despise. It echoes in our thoughts, taints our emotions, clouds our view of others. But when we forgive, we release not only them, we release ourselves. We reclaim the dignity of our peace. But forgiveness does not guarantee restoration. That is another difficult truth. You can forgive someone with all sincerity and still find that the relationship cannot be restored. Perhaps they are unwilling. Perhaps the damage was too great. Perhaps trust cannot yet be rebuilt. Forgiveness does not demand immediate intimacy. It does not ignore wisdom or boundaries, but it does remove hatred from the equation. It allows the relationship, if it is to heal, to do so on clean soil. In this way, forgiveness is a beginning. It is the act that makes hope possible. Before we can speak, before we can plan, before we can rebuild, someone must be willing to forgive. And if we wait for the other person to go first, we may wait forever. The one who forgives takes the first step, not because they are weak, but because they are strong enough to lead. They choose mercy over memory. They choose grace over grudges, and in doing so, they become the door through which restoration might walk. Prayer helps us in this. Forgiveness is too heavy a burden to carry alone. It is too difficult to muster by sheer discipline. But in prayer we are reminded that we ourselves have been forgiven much, that we are not called to give what we have not received. The well of grace does not begin in us. We draw from a deeper source. In that divine mercy we find strength to offer what we never thought possible. A clean slate, a new beginning, an unmerited kindness. So do not wait for healing to be complete before you forgive. Do not think that forgiveness is the reward at the end of the journey. It is the trailhead. It is the courage to say, "This hurt me, but it will not rule me." It is the strength to lay down the stone, not because justice is irrelevant, but because love is greater. Forgiveness is not the finish line. It is the gate, and through that gate lies the long, beautiful, redemptive path of restoration.